This next story it's a fictional account. So, in speaking I in the story in the first person, I am telling a story, a parable. It's called The Neighbor's Nativity. I'd only been in the store for 5 minutes now, and back in the car, there the windshield was all snowed up again, and sticking enough that the wipers wouldn't even just push the snow off. Bad enough that everything got left to the last minute, huh? Bad enough that I was out here dealing with the crowds and the grumpy cashiers. Bad enough that no store seemed to have what I was out here to find, what I promised I'd get. Now, I had to get out with the window scraper for the third time today. My feet are still cold and wet from the last time. So, I push out of the car like a bear awoken from early hibernation, snarls and all. But there was no one to hear me in that particular corner of the parking lot, thankfully. And applying the scraper to windshield, I loosened just enough that the wipers kicked in and smacked the scraper out of my hand into the snowbank, and wet slushy snow got at my face and down my jacket and shirt. That was the last little bit of Christmas I could stand. Humbug! Shouted the newly minted Scrooge. This just isn't worth it. And my frustration had me ready to just go home, pack up everything away in boxes, and start shopping for Valentine's Day. I mean, half the stores have stuff out for it anyway. But I cared enough that when I looked into my daughter's eyes, when she had finally come up with a gift that she had absolutely wanted for Christmas, I looked at her loving, hopeful eyes and promised, "Daddy's going to get you that, honey. It sounds like the most perfect present to get at Christmas." "Daddy, you promised to find me a manger, like a baby Jesus manger, where I can move all the people around and they're not all breakable? You promise?" "A nativity set. You think that somewhere in the world, in this town, some store would have a nativity set? It's on the cards. It's in front of churches, sure, and there are even a few with pieces all glued in, yeah. Then there are the ones where you buy each of the figures, but no one seems to have all the figures. You can buy these wise men here. I wonder if I can paint a wise man to look like a shepherd or to look like Joseph. I don't think I can do it to look like Mary. And Jesus is always a special order item. I even thought of getting some parts at one of the stores and then some other parts at another, but I feel like I'll just end up with a whole flock of shepherds." My exasperation must have been audible because someone, a complete stranger, spoke up with a kind voice, but one that startled me out of my petulant evaluation of my predicament. "Excuse me, you seem to be flustered for someone looking at nativity models." She had a pretty gentle face, a kind smile, and that probably saved her from an outpouring of my grief. But when I couldn't shout in anger, then I sighed, and my answer came with a far more telling tear, in fact. "I promised her," I said. "I promised her that she would have a nativity set, not just one of those model ones, but one where you can move the people around. Not breakable, not cheap plastic either." "Oh, yes," she said, "and by this point very hard to find, I am sure." I felt a bit of a bubble of anger at her sympathy, but she still had that understanding tone. She wasn't judging. She was consoling. "I feel like I've been everywhere," I said. "Everywhere but the North Pole." And it felt good to joke. "I'm not sure they'd be up to a shorter like that up there anyway." She paused, and I could tell she was deeply considering something. "Yeah," she said, with very strong resolve, and turned to me and said, "Get in your car and follow me." Given the adventure the day had been already, I thought, why not? At least my windshield can't be too snowed up after a few minutes. So, after brushing off my windshield yet again, what, did you think this was one of those stories where everything starts going perfectly all of a sudden? No. We started making our way through the snowy streets, and I soon realized that we were heading back towards my neighborhood, to my subdivision. How does she know what street I live on? Only she pulls in and stops, not at my house, but 2 doors away from mine. I, of course, pull into my own driveway and walk over. I'm more than a little confused. I know this house, but an elderly man lives here, lived here. Pretty sure he died not that long ago. She answers the door. "Well, hello, neighbor," she says. She offers a churlish grin, and she says, "I am Emma, and I think you knew my dad, Ernest." I felt embarrassed. I was pretty sure I knew his name, or that it started with an E. I was pretty sure I even called him Ernie when I helped him with his garbage bins that icy morning way back in the fall, before I think he got sick, before I didn't see him anymore. "You know," she said, "he spoke very nicely of you. He said he's a kind heart, and he seems like a good father, but he's too busy too often with the wrong things." I wanted to say that was nice, but wrong things? Work over fun, prestige over family, and he wasn't one to talk. He was too busy when I was little too. But like you, he tried. You and my dad had a lot in common, she said. "Now, come with me." So she led me down to the basement stairs, and we descended into a workshop wafting with the smells of various woods, the brightness of cedar and pine, the tickling scents of oaks and mahogany, and the sweetness of maple. There. And she points to a jumble of polished figurines on the workbench, and a little hutch-like barn of the same scale, with little squat figures that they're not fine art by any means, but from shepherd to Wiseman and Mary and Joseph and a donkey, and a little carved manger with straw glued inside, and a brightly polished figure of a swaddled baby. Simple, beautiful, and everything my daughter was asking for. I sniff back a tear, and I ask, "How much?" I mean, she could have said anything at that point. I'd given up to half my kingdom, and I would have. "It's a gift. In fact, it solves a bit of a mystery for me, I think. You see, Dad made it a point to get this done before he got too sick to do anything. And I couldn't figure out why, since everyone in our family pretty well has this. And I looked around the shop to see bits and pieces of similar nativities in different stages. "I don't understand," I said. "I think Dad was making this for her, for your daughter, maybe for all of you. Do you know you were the only neighbor," she said, "the only neighbor who he ever saw help anybody? Groceries, garbage bins, a little bit of yard work, or driving someone to pick their car from the shop once so they didn't have to get a cab? He noticed you doing this. Not that you ever seemed to have the time, but you always made it. You tried. Not that you always did it either, but sometimes, as often as you could, it seemed you did. And I don't know if you knew it, but when Dad started feeling bad, your daughter brought flowers. Your wife brought over plates of food. And I'll tell you, when he started getting sick, every little bit of it helped. And so he finished this, his last nativity. But none of us in the family knew who it was for. So here you go." And the jumble of wooden figurines tumbled around the small straw-filled barn, clattering, and I accepted this very humbling gift. Not just the nativity set, but that something I had done, that my family had done, could have inspired, been involved, encouraged its making. That this kindness was a kindness in reply, a kindness shared at least. "After all," she said, "Jesus did say, 'Love thy neighbor.'" I finally caught up to what was happening. "I did not know you were his daughter, that Ernest had much of a family. There wasn't a gathering in the spring, These things get delayed these days. I think it makes it harder," she said. "I'm trying to sort out the house and all of this," waving her hand back over the workshop. "What do you do with something like this?" She sighed, then smiled. "But this," pointing back to the Nativity, "this is certainly for you and your family. Look on the bottom." And so I carefully turned it over. On the bottom of each Nativity, Emma continued, he inscribed a word somewhere from the Christmas story. Mine says light. My cousin has angels. And to Dad's younger brother, he inscribed wise. Yours says time. What does it mean? Why time? But the answer was already nagging at me. Something hinting back to our last conversation, my last conversation with Ernest. A conversation that had slowly inspired me to ask my daughter what she wanted most for Christmas. And that gave me a spark of joy when she answered. As Ernest and I had shuffled up his slippery driveway that day in the fall, speaking with gravity and sincerity, he said, "I hope you are taking the time to enjoy that family of yours. You can get any job to keep you busy, but when it comes to family, you will never get enough time." I was too busy. I didn't have the time when the ambulance came and took Ernest to the hospital. I was at a conference or something. I did not know my daughter had made him a card, brought him flowers, sent it to the hospital. All I knew that was time was probably his last word to me. I thanked Emma as I blundered into the drifting snow again. "And if you would like to join us over the holidays, even Christmas dinner, we would be glad to have you. And I'll help you in any way I can with your father's workshop or anything like that." "Thank you," she stopped me. "Maybe I'll take you up on that. But in any case, you go have a wonderful Christmas." It wasn't far to go, but deep in thought, I did not rush. I quietly entered the house. I was able to set up the Nativity on the coffee table. I could not stand the thought of wrapping it. It's not that kind of present. And that evening, our family simply spent time together. My wife enjoyed a tea and smiled a lot. My daughter wondered and examined every figure and every corner of the handcrafted gift that so wonderfully and personally reminds us that as much as we put a value on time, God has placed a greater value on time. Now, for me, time is best never spent, but shared, given instead of measured. Time is something that if we try to hold on to, it is only measurable in moments. But if we give time over to and put it in God's hands, He crafts time into an eternity.